What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and it is banned and restricted announcement time for Magic the Gathering, and this is going to be a big one. I think all the banned and restricted announcements are pretty big. I think going into a lot of them, we kind of tongue-in-cheek know what formats are going to be affected by the banned and restricted announcement, and this one is really no different. I kind of expect Standard to be the main focus of this banned and restricted announcement. As we know, rotation is coming up with the release of Edge of Eternities, and really, Edge of Eternities isn't rotating a whole lot that is impacting the format very highly. Of course, we know kind of like some of the notable ones are the temporary lockdown is like the big one. Of course, a lot of the domain stuff as well is rotating. So we're kind of losing one deck that was kind of at the top of the metagame, at Pro Tour Aether Drift. And then by the time we got to, the Final Fantasy Pro Tour, we did see it have a pretty good showing, getting a top 16 finish. But in general, that's going to be like the last hurrah for the deck. And, the rest of the format is dominated by, red-based aggro strategies and of course, Azorius Omniscience. So that's kind of what we're going to be expecting is changes to Standard. Everything else seems like it's kind of wide open. Legacy, I've heard, needs some changes. Modern probably could go without, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was any changes. And of course, Pioneer, I want so badly to just be back into the main fold of like the RCQs and things like that. I really want to see some amount of changes made here soon before we get the announcement for next year's like RCQs and things like that to see if it actually makes a comeback in paper. But before we get into the actual banned and restricted announcement, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we post content like this, kind of going over some of the news of the main competitive formats of Magic the Gathering, that'd be Standard and Modern, hopefully Pioneer here soon, and any other longer form content kind of pertaining to those formats, then please consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell so you know when those future videos get posted. It's a very easy way to support me and my content, and if you want even more content from me, go ahead, check out the description down below. I have a Discord server along with my Twitch channel, the Casual Spikes Podcast YouTube channel, and the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service that you can use to rent cards for Magic the Gathering online and play whatever decks you want whenever you want. If you use my code in the description down below, you'll get 5% off your monthly subscription, as well as some pretty cool bonuses for the longer that you are subscribed to their service. You'll end up getting a cheaper rate on your monthly subscription. You'll be able to increase your limit, things like that. Go ahead and check them out. It's an awesome service. Being a content creator, just getting to play whatever decks I want, whenever I want, is super convenient. They have super fast trading, so it's almost instant basically, and for a lot of people, if you're subscribed high enough or long enough, you end up getting cards from the new set as soon as the next day. So awesome service. I cannot recommend them enough. Go ahead and check them out in the description down below, and remember to use that code if you sign up for their subscription service. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and check out this banned and restricted announcement. So here we are, and this is an absolutely major announcement for Standard, as this is essentially the prequel to Rotation, as we have Corey Steelcutter, a card that in one of my shorts that I talked about, potentially being a card that was ban-worthy, but I thought it was honestly too new for them to ban. Obviously, VV was apparently the only safe option as being a really good Izzet card that wasn't going to get banned. But Corey Steelcutter banned in Standard. That is absolutely insane work. Abuela's Awakening. So there goes the main option for Azorius Omniscience decks to actually put Omniscience back into play. We have Monstrous Rage finally getting banned. This pump spell proving to be too good for the format. Again, I think Monstrous Rage, the real problem was the fact that the roll token gave the creature +1/+1 and trample notably. So just in the fact that it blows you out in combat, and it continues to be like an absolute massive threat later on in the game. We have Heartfire Hero, easily one of the best one-drops in the mono red deck. Of course, just enabled a lot of very powerful kills where you're just hitting for tons of damage very early on. Heartfire Hero now leaves. On top of that, too, of course, when it dies, it just absolutely explodes and deals a massive amount of damage. Even after you pump it up, get in a ton of damage, you're going to get even more damage. Up the Beanstalk, probably one of the most problematic cards printed, at least from the Wilds of Eldraine set, and, of course, created problems in Modern. I don't know if this is banned in Legacy, but definitely gave some fits in the Modern format and is pretty powerful in Pioneer as well. Finally getting banned. Hopeless Nightmare. This was a mainstay and one of the, culprits of like some really broken draws from like the self-balance decks where, they play Hopeless Nightmare like 4, 5, 6 times over the course of like 3 turns. You've essentially mulliganed to like 2 and trying to pressure them while also, trying to disrupt maybe what they're doing or whatever. Like you're kind of like shoehorned into one lane and kind of hoping the top of your deck is very generous to you. Hopeless Nightmare is banned, and this town ain't big enough. Probably one of the flashiest spells, had some great synergy with Up the Beanstalk, and there were some really cool decks kind of sent around. This town ain't big enough. Of course, this kind of fell out of favor a little bit as like the self-bounce decks got a little bit worse, and we had some of the other Izzet decks, and some of the Izzet decks actually started picking this up. But now this town ain't big enough is banned in Standard, and it looks like everywhere else there's essentially no changes in the main formats. Alchemy is suspending Corey Steelcutter. Pioneer Best of One is banning Tybalt's Trickery, which this card is just absolutely absurd and messed up anyway. Historic is banning Counterspell is unbanned in Historic, so I mean that's pretty cool there. And the effective date for this, of course, is today, with the next announcement coming all the way in November. So we got a while, and my initial reaction to this is, holy shit, this is a lot of bannings for Standard. And I think that this is, this is something that's important without knowing the price, because I think Corey Steelcutter is like relatively cheap for essentially a multi-format staple. Monstrous Rage is a little bit of money. I'm not sure if Heartfire Hero is, or really Up the Beanstalk. But some of these cards, like they're not like they're banning $30, $40, $50 cards here. They are banning cards that are relatively cheap. Like I said, with maybe the exception to Corey Steelcutter, and not really know. I know this town ain't big enough is like a few bucks. Hopeless Nightmare is probably like $1 or $2, just by the nature of being a part of like one of the most played decks in the format before the release of like Aether Drift / Final Fantasy. Up the Beanstalk has just always been kind of like, I think, in that middle ground where even though it's been banned basically most places, or really Modern, one of the most popular formats. But whatever, like this is a banning I can kind of get behind. This is essentially a pseudo rotation before rotation, as in like, we see that Corey Steelcutter from the Izzet decks and Monstrous Rage again from the Izzet decks. Of course, Monstrous Rage also going into the mono red strategies, and also banning Heartfire Hero. Definitely neuters pretty heavily the red decks of the format. With Abuela's Awakening also just kind of eliminating the Azorius Omniscience deck altogether. I don't know if necessarily there's any replacements for Abuela's Awakening, but I'm sure there's probably not any that are like as efficient as Abuela's Awakening, or versatile, whatever the case may be. Up the Beanstalk, there really is no replacement for this kind of card, especially in kind of the domain strategies, so that kind of sucks for them, but I think it makes the domain strategies a little bit better. Hopeless Nightmare, of course, worse for balance strategies, and this time big enough is, probably one of the better blue cards. Maybe not one of the best blue cards, because, we have like Storm Chaser's talent is pretty amazing. But, this time big enough is definitely second. Like this and Storm Chaser's talent kind of go hand in hand with each other. So overall, I think that these are really good bannings. I think that you definitely are going to get a lot of mileage out of rotation happening, and then you're also going to get a lot of just new and powerful decks coming up thanks to kind of like all these bannings. You're severely neutered the aggro decks. You've hit the Izzet decks pretty hard as like one of their best options. And then, of course, like a lot of the other decks that would kind of rise up in the metagame with like Izzet and Mono Red and Omniscience getting hit, you also kind of hit them as well. And while I think Domain would be like maybe like my early, like if I was to play a tournament today with the bans active, I probably would lean towards just playing the giant mid-range deck over the, whatever the aggro decks or combo decks end up looking like after this. But, I'm pretty impressed. Like, this is absolutely amazing. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of hard to formulate words because I didn't think it would actually go this deep. I thought Corey Steelcutter was basically safe for at least another ban and restricted announcement here, but I mean, that just completely went out the window. Corey Steelcutter is out of here, so it's going to be interesting to see what all of these major archetypes look like kind of going forward, if they even survive what the metagame looks like going forward. So, of course, none of these other changes we really care about. Tybalt's Trickery, I can't believe that this is like a card that they came up with and thought this was okay. So let's kind of jump to Standard real quick. We'll go through it. So today's announcement is our once a year early rotation window for Standard. Our goal with this window is to set the next rotation cycle up to be as fun as possible, and we do this saying an early goodbye to a number of cards that have proven their strength and made the format less fun, either by creating unhealthy play patterns or by restricting viable deck building options available in the environment. Below, we'll discuss the bans and the reasoning behind them, then we'll discuss the lesson we learned from these cards for 3-year Standard. We're announcing the banning of 7 cards in Standard today. 7's a lot of cards even for our early rotation window, and especially so since it's been 2 years since any cards were banned at all in Standard. So how did we get here? Our last banner restricted announcement was roughly 3 months ago, shortly after the release of Aether Drift. At the time, Standard was looking like a fun, healthy format, which I do kind of agree with. I think Standard, at least at that time, was pretty healthy, and some of the decks that we kind of considered to be the top decks in the format didn't really end up performing that well at the event, and then we'd seen like Domain kind of rise up and take over. And they even say here, red-based aggro strategies with red-based aggressive mice strategies, self-balanced synergy decks with Nurturing Pixie, and then other Pixie-style decks, Domain Overlord, Ramp deck. But, you know, we obviously know that by the time we got to Final Fantasy, that completely changed. Is it what, and probably not even really then, but like the last Spotlight series and the last set of regional championships where we saw Is it just absolutely explode and kind of take over, only really got better by Vivi, probably one of the best cards out of Final Fantasy. They're just absolutely insane. You know, they were represented over 40% of the metagame at Pro Tour Final Fantasy, you know, and this being Ian Robb's list, where, you know, they piloted this to a second place finish, losing to Ken Yukihiro, who was on Mono Red. If you want a full recap of that Pro Tour, you can go ahead and check out the video that we posted last week talking about like the details and the metagames and everything like that for Final Fantasy Standard. It's clear that Is It Prowess decks having a negative effect on the standard metagame. When your number is at like 40%, especially the Pro Tour, I mean, this is like the highest levels of competition. You know, we kind of expect some like skewed or polarized like deck choices, but even in like other Pro Tours where we see like 15 to 20%, I would say when there's like a clearly defined best deck or there's a deck to beat in the format, I would say that that's pretty normal, that like a lot of pros would probably pick up that deck. Even like maybe 25%, I think kind of for me is like too much, but sure, I can understand it. Players like kind of these more defined metagames that only feature a few decks so that you have a very clear slide board plan against what's kind of going on. And then I guess you could argue that maybe some of the decks at the bottom like have a chance, like if they kind of guess the metagame right, that if they just queue into a lot of a certain matchup, they can kind of beat that matchup. Whatever the case may be, I still think that, you know, 44 or 42%, whatever it was for Is It Prowess is absolutely egregious and absolutely insane. Corey Steelcutter is the obvious target for the Is It Prowess decks for the banning. Quite simply, he's too strong for the format. Corey Steelcutter is also making a large impact on Modern. Format is considerably more powerful than Standard, as the quality of being a challenging card to interact with profitably due to the increased burden of answering artifact cards with ease when Corey Steelcutter leaves a meaningful board presence behind, even when quickly destroyed. The combination of sheer strength and resilience has let Corey Steelcutter run rampant on Standard, which is why Corey Steelcutter needed to be banned. Of course, we could argue for the Is It decks too with Monstrous Rage that it just comboed very well with Vivi, where like that and Wild Ride, you know, you just play it on a VV, you're going to have a 4 power VV after casting one spell, and then you're going to be able to make mana with it and cast 4 mana worth of spells. Again, kind of reminiscent of like Fire Design when we've seen like Fires of Invention, when we've seen like Wilderness Reclamation, where even though you are restricted to like activating only once and on your turn, the fact that you can cast then multiple spells at that time on your main phase, more than likely when your opponent's tapped out, unlike Wilderness Reclamation, where you're kind of like also having to tap out again on your turn, and it kind of creates the same scenario. You have to play like instant speed, where this like you can play things like Storm Chaser's Talent and whatever. So definitely, at least for that, a pretty good hit, and also getting a amount of red decks as well. Second most popular deck of the Pro Tour is Zori's with about 20% of the metagame. The Omniscience decks, of course, like they have their loop where they get 2 of the dumb little dragon here, Meringue River Regent, and then I believe they were still playing. Where is it? I guess they're not playing it. Actually, pretty crazy. So, I mean, like, this deck just got to... Oh, here we go. Jace the Perfected Mind. They ended up, like, milling your opponent out by just getting to, like, play this, you know, and cast it for free. Comes in with 5 counters. You get to, like, minus 4 this to have them mill, like, 12 cards and then pick it up with the Meringue River region, plus picking up another region, whatever, and just kind of going infinite once you get an Omniscience into play. Monstrous Rage was, like, a good way of kind of attacking these decks as well. So, unfortunately, Abuelo's Awakening getting banned, but also Monstrous Rage, probably one of the best tools for the red decks. Ken Yukihiro, of course, ended up winning the event. Heartfire Hero is another key piece of the red aggro decks. When you go Manifold, you know, Heartfire Hero on 1 into Manifold Mouse on 2, tagging with a 2/2 double striker is pretty insane. And then the next turn when you get to attack with a 3/3 double striker, and you get to leave up mana or potentially even just play like a like a Ember Heart Challenger or whatever other 2-mana spell. Like really with the onset of cards like Self-Destruct, where you could, in theory, Monstrous Rage your Heartfire hero to have like a 6-power double striker, and then just have Self-Destruct deal 6 damage to your opponent, and then it have it deal 6 damage to itself, killing it, and then having it deal another 6 damage is essentially like a turn 3 kill with this deck. And even though like Self-Destruct is like a one of in this deck, I mean, you still have like Lightning Strike and other things that you can play for 2 mana. It's just absolutely insane and unreal how much damage that this deck can put out. Create Domain of the Beanstalk is no stranger to the ban list. It was banned in Modern since 2023, and I believe was kind of like a sweet looking deck in it was a pretty sweet card also in like Legacy and stuff. Still shows up. But yeah, that of course of the Beanstalk had to go for a while. That and like This Town Ain't Big Enough as well. You know, we talked about that. Monstrous Rage and Up the Beanstalk getting banned. Hopeless Nightmare really just made games feel hopeless, especially when they're able to play it 15,000 times. This Town Ain't Big Enough alongside Storm Chaser's Talent, again, being just a really nice 2-card combo that you could, you know, make an otter when it comes into play and then spend mana to get it back. Even though it was very mana intensive, when you got to a game where you're both just kind of, you know, top decking at that point, once you had these 2 cards and they were just powerful enough on their own, but when you have them together and you get to a point where like maybe your opponent's just kind of drawing air, or you're at like kind of this board stall, just being able to make a 1/1 every single turn and then just pick it back up and then potentially pick something else back up as well, and continuing to get value and essentially like getting card advantage in that way is just really powerful. Plus, I mean, like this is also a way that you could like protect a lot of your key things as well. And then of course getting to replay them because they had very powerful ETB abilities. So well, that's where we're at. Our last announcement for Standard today, considering our next Standard rotation will be until early 2027, which it is happening with the Edge of Eternity's release, we'll be having 2 of our early rotation Standard banning windows before the next Standard rotation. You can expect one of these windows in about 18 months right before rotation as usual. The other one will be roughly 9 months around the midway point, but we haven't decided on the exact date yet. So it looks like they're going to be taking a more, they're going to be a little bit harsher on the approach for Standard as they try to essentially control the format as best as possible. I think at this point you might as well just go back to like a 2-year rotation where, you know, we had originally, and like have this kind of ban philosophy as well. So I definitely, I definitely think that I like this approach. I just wish that, and I really like the bannings too, obviously. I think that the fact that for a lot of people is like, well, bannings can be very expensive to players. Well, yes, like in totality, like there's a chance that like Mono Red and all these other decks aren't viable, or potentially are severely handicapped to the point where, you know, there are just better decks to play. And I think that's kind of the risk you take when you build into these very powerful decks. Now, of course, people could say like, oh, well, I built it into Domain because I want to play Domain. Well, Domain is going to rotate soon anyway. Like a lot of the key cards from that deck were going to rotate anyway, but a lot of the other cards are still going to be very playable. So bannings just are not feel goods anyway. Of course, that if every set that came out, it just fit and slotted perfectly into the metagame and just tried to play its role and everything like that, we would be in an okay position. But clearly that doesn't happen. There are bannings that times need to take place, and we can't just look at, you know, outside factors other than creating a healthy metagame for these bans. It sucks. I've been on the receiving end of, you know, building a deck that is very powerful and then it getting banned and being like, well, I feel like I'm just out the money or whatever. But that's just kind of like the price you pay, unfortunately, for competitive Magic, and we should be, you know, advocating for cheaper prices on cards or trying to figure out a way to get product costs down rather than just like, well, things are fine being expensive. We just need to have less bans. And even if a format's not fun or it stops being entertaining or whatever the case may be, miserable to watch, whatever, that we just can't have bans anyway because it might financially impact somebody who can't really afford that to happen, you know, which at that point, if you can't financially afford for a deck that you built to get banned, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, maybe you have to find other avenues of like playing the game. I don't like kind of sounding like that, but unfortunately Magic is very expensive, and until you get prices to go down, that's kind of where we're at with this. But, you know, of course, if you stayed with me to the end of this, appreciate it so much for you watching. Again, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see future videos from me. Check out the description down below for all the different links to various different platforms for content 5%, as well as checking out the Manatraders link, the Manatraders code in the description down below to go and sign up and get 5% off your monthly subscription. That's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.